Hello everyone, welcome back to the Unstoppable Dad Project. Here we are back for another week. Thank you, as always, for taking the time to have a listen to what we've got going on here. I'm eternally grateful to those of you that firstly listen to this, but secondly, those of you that send messages of support, send through questions, send through ideas on how we can improve this podcast and how we can kind of keep to grow it moving forward. So just on that note, as we do always before we get started, I need to ask you all two favors. Number one, whatever podcast platform you are listening to this on, if you're able to subscribe to the podcast, that way you can get updates whenever we release new episodes. But also if you're on Apple Podcasts, jump on there and leave us a review, because that helps on that platform to get us out to more people. Number two is jump on, follow us on social media. So at The Unstoppable Dad on Instagram and The Unstoppable Dad Project on Facebook. We're only on those two platforms. Main reason being because I kind of suck. I am not great at social media, and they're the two easiest ones for me to use. But jump on there, give us a like, give us a follow, and share any posts or any podcast episode around with people that you think might get some entertainment or some value from what we do. If you can do those two things for me, again, I'll not only be grateful for you listening, but for you doing that, because that is how we will continue to grow this thing into the future and make it something that we can continue to do and get better at. All right. So now the housekeeping's over with. Today's episode, today's topic that I'm going to dive into, and it's something that I've obviously thought long and hard about. And it is in my wheelhouse because it's around training, but it's more, how do you set your kids up to be as physically capable as they can be within the constructs of, I guess, the physical gifts that they've got. And it's something that I've gone down the rabbit hole quite a bit on, obviously, since we've had our first kid, since Sophie came along. And, just one of my, I guess, philosophies on what I wanted to do with both our kids is try and give them as much exposure to stuff from a physical point of view as what we can. And we're obviously in a very unique and privileged position from that point of view, in the fact that we own a gym. We have always owned a gym for as long as our kids have been around. So they're kind of growing up in that environment where, they're not only seeing dad and mum do things, but they're seeing, other people do it, and they're in that environment. So, what we have is quite unique. So they already have exposure to those things. We, from a very young age, they would come in and they would visit me at work, and we've got gymnastics rings set up, that are low set. That, Ollie came in here the other day, and I didn't even know he could do it, and every time he walks in here, he'll run over and he'll grab the gymnastics rings. And a couple of weeks ago when he came in, he ran over, he grabbed the gymnastics rings, and he just picks his feet up off the floor and just started hanging and swinging back and forth without any coaching, without any coaxing. Like, he just did it. That was just what he wanted to do, and he just went ahead and did it. So, that's obviously great for him to help, develop his grip strength and coordination and, all these other good physical attributes that go with it. And then, the same day, earlier on this week, Soph came in after school, and she's done the same thing, which is probably where Ollie's kind of picked it up from. It's the monkey see, monkey do, where they've been able to, go and see it, and they're just replicating what they do. And she's come in, she's started hanging off the rings, and she started doing like semi pull-ups from the rings. Now, we've got her in gymnastics, so I'm assuming that she's picked some of that up from gymnastics. But again, for them to grow up in that type of an environment and have access to that side of things, for them, that's a normal thing to do. And I understand that maybe for other kids that may not 100% be a normal thing, but that leads into the exposure piece. Like, in my opinion, when you are trying to give kids the best physical leg up they can, I think exposure is everything, and exposing them to as much stuff as possible. And obviously when they're young, they have to enjoy what they're doing, because especially when they're extremely young, like our kids are 6 and 2, like if they're not enjoying it, they're not going to be engaged. There's no point in forcing it. But by exposing them to a lot of different things, gymnastics, swimming, basic, like your martial arts, things like that. And then eventually when they want to, getting into team sports, kicking the soccer ball, kicking the football, doing all these things, and giving them a massive amount of exposure to as many different things as possible, I think in the early stages is probably the best way to kind of set that athletic foundation. And then as they get older, I think for as long as possible, you still want to give them exposure to as much as they can. And I personally believe that trying to restrict specialization for kids in sport, and this doesn't come from obviously interacting with my own kids because they're not of that age yet, but this also comes from my own sports history and the fact that I've obviously had a lot to do with coaching specifically young men up to kind of 19, 20 years of age through American football. I've been involved in that sport now for 20 odd years in this country. I've coached on a national level, so for the Australian team, and getting to understand how kids and specifically young men develop and they move into, as they move through puberty and into their later teenage years and they start to reach physical maturity. The thing that I've observed and I have learnt from other people that I've spoken to on the topic is you want to try and restrict, you want to try and not be, not, what would be the word for it? Sorry, I've just drawn a blank, but not restrict what they are doing, try and give them as wide a variety of things and as wide a variety exposure to sports as they can, and not start to specialize them too early, because by specializing them too early, there is a few things that can happen. There are a few from the point of view of skill recruitment. You can limit the way that because they're not exploring the full ranges of their body, but also too, depending on what the sport is and how the sport is played, especially at a young age, it can lead to injuries, movement imbalances and things like that later on in life. And that's one thing that, obviously dealing with adults and coaching adults, I have seen some people that, have spent a lot of time specializing in a particular sport for a long time. And then later on in life, they kind of pay the price for that. And so one of the biggest philosophies, I guess, for me with my kids to try and give them the best leg up physically is to obviously expose them to as many things as possible. And I think one of the ways we can expose them as parents is actually to set the example, because if there's one thing I've learned through my own kids, if I am doing something and I am training and I am working out and they see that, they want to be involved in it. They want to be involved in what I'm doing. The hanging off rings and things like that. They will come in here, and if I'm training while they come in here to the gym, they will see me doing it. They will see me lifting weights. They will see me doing something physical, whether it be jiu-jitsu or playing sport. And I think that encourages them to want to do the same, because as much as we think that if we just enroll them in sport and they do it and they're going to be physically drawn to it, I think if we want them to do it long term, it is this element of monkey see, monkey do, where they look up to you as a parent. And if you're not practicing what you preach from that point of view and leading by example, I think as they get older and they get a little smarter and they start to question things, they will almost call you out on your own bullshit, and that's something that I think you've got to be very mindful of when trying to get kids into physical activity and trying to get them to do something. But exposure to a wide array of stuff is, I think, one of the key underlying factors from when they're younger through to when they hit their teenage years, that if we can foster that and we can foster that athleticism across different games, across different types of movements, and try and avoid specialization. And yes, I think the kid's personality itself will be drawn towards something that maybe it wants to do more than other things. I think that's a really important thing from their athletic development. And I think having a mixture of individual and team sports is also a good thing too. Less from a physical standpoint, because, it is from a physical standpoint because there's closed loop and open loop activities that you can only get in both aspects, but being able to have both those elements where from a mental standpoint they are relying on themselves to perform for an individual sport, and then understanding team dynamics and the importance of teamwork comes into play when they're playing a team sport. But that all comes with, I guess that one underlying and that main underlying principle of giving them exposure to as much stuff as possible. And then, of course, once they get older, they're going to start to be drawn towards more things that they enjoy. And I guess some of the things that, for me, understanding human movement and understanding kind of a base level of athleticism, outside of that, what's a starting point? So if you've got younger kids, what is a starting point and where do you want them to start from? And for me, there's probably three main things that I want them to do. And then outside of those three things, it's up to them what they want to do. I'm going to encourage them to do as much as possible. But as I said right at the start, yes, you want to give them exposure to as much stuff as possible. But in the early stages, I think forcing them to do something can turn them off wanting to do it. And I'll give you an example of that in a second. But there's three major things for our kids that I want them to do early on, when they're ready to do it, but early on. Number one, and they're gymnastics. They are swimming, and they are some form of martial art or self-defense. And the gymnastics, the reason gymnastics is something that I do want them to try and be, or some level of gymnastics, calisthenics, something like that, is because it's going to teach them body control and body awareness. And not only that, it is a good form of body weight strength training where they are going to be able to start to strengthen their joints, strengthen their muscles, and they're going to be able to start that process in a fun manner without having to worry about barbells and dumbbells and form on kettlebells and things like that. It allows them to explore their body in a lot of different ways and understand how their body moves, not just on a particular plane of motion. Like getting people to lift weights and do CrossFit and things like that. And if you're unfamiliar with the planes of motion, you can go and research it a little bit. But a lot of that stuff where you're squatting, you're deadlifting, it's all on a sagittal plane of motion, which is basically anything you can do in a doorway. And if you limit kids to that, I think you're limiting their athletic development. Whereas something like gymnastics, they're moving on different planes of motion. They're moving laterally. They're moving up and down. They're not, you can't just do a lot of what they do in a doorway. You have to, there needs space. And that's, I think, a good foundation, because then that just sets them up with that body control and that awareness when they get older, when they do want to get into team sports, contact sports, things like that. So that's why the gymnastics thing is. The number two is the swimming, just because it is a different orientation. So compared to the horizon, obviously, if yes, there is tumbling and things like that in gymnastics, which there's a lot of evidence out there which shows benefit to the development of the middle ear and, balance and coordination and help with that. But also with swimming, you get a lot of that as well. But you're also doing it in water. And for us, where we live in Australia, we live on a coastline. Obviously, I think swimming's just probably the most important skill for any kid, because if they get caught in a body of water and they're unable to get themselves out, it's a recipe for disaster. But there are some physiological things there that working in a different environment to just being on your feet or being out of the water does help develop, cognitive function. It does help develop, again, their middle ear and kind of their ability to move in space and different space. But also the skill of swimming is obviously important from a safety perspective too. So they're the first two. And then the third one is martial arts, because I believe that it's important for everybody to know how to defend themselves and know how to know I guess what can go wrong. And that's not even, obviously, if you've listened to this show before, you understand my affinity to a martial art like jiu-jitsu. And I do think jiu-jitsu is probably one of the better ones for young kids to get into, especially young women, because it is close contact and it does. And not only that, I've seen obviously not in my own kids because they're not enrolled in doing it just yet. And I think they have to be old enough and mature enough and mentally mature enough and at a point where they can do it, which will bring me back to my point that I was talking about before about like when they're ready to do it. But it's important. I think some form of self-defense, and that doesn't, my kids might end up doing boxing, Muay Thai or something like that. Like that might be the self-defense that they want to choose. But I think having a respect for, what can go wrong and a respect for the fact that, being punched in the mouth, basically, if you want to mouth off and you want to be bigger than your boots, like there can potentially be dire consequences for that. I think that's one, but I think also two, having the confidence that you can handle yourself should something go wrong. And especially for us, obviously our eldest being a female, and some people may see this as chauvinistic, and honestly I don't care, but that's I think especially for young women, it is important for them to have confidence in themselves and their ability to de-escalate a situation or be okay should something go wrong. I think that's a very, very important mental attribute, so that they don't have to live in fear and they can have confidence and they can go about their life in a way where they are able to, be confident and live their life well and not in fear. And I think that's an important thing, that learning self-defense for a good period of time can give any kid and can also give any adult as well too. If you're an adult and you feel that's the way you are, then it's not too late to go and start. Maybe it's time to go and start, especially if you have a kid and you feel like that and you see these traits starting to manifest in your children. Maybe it's something to explore for you, so that you don't kind of pass that on, because monkey see, monkey do. A lot of the time, the kids are going to pick up the things that we don't want them to more than they're going to pick up the things that we do want them to. But what I was talking about when they're ready, because exposing them to these things, we've had two instances with both our kids. And the first one was when we tried to put Ollie in gymnastics, and he just wanted to go and do his own thing. And granted, we probably tried to put him in there a little bit too young. He is only 2, but it was just timing, because Soph was there. She'd been in for a few years. She's enjoying it. And we kind of like, we can see if he can do it. And he just was not ready. He just didn't want to engage with what was going on. He just was not interested in what was going on. He was too interested to go off and do his own thing. So we made the decision to pull him out. So right now he's doing swimming, but then we've got other things that he does at home, which are just his little things to do. And we'll obviously look to potentially get him back into something like that a little bit later. But for now, he wasn't ready. And my daughter did come to me and asked if she could do jiu-jitsu. And it turned out that this was quite a few years ago now, and they do start teaching jiu-jitsu from, I believe, 4 years old, which I think if your kid is that way inclined and you think they want, like if they really, really want to go and do it, I think it's a very good thing for them to do, especially like I can see, and it's probably crystal balling it a little bit, but I could see like Ollie potentially going and doing jiu-jitsu at that age, being that he is, he's a rough and tumble boy. Like he likes to get physical. He likes to wrestle, with me. And that's like, I can see that. Whereas Soph hasn't really necessarily been that way. And when she did, we worked it out. And this was where we ended up putting her in gymnastics, and she's taken to gymnastics and she loves it and she loves going. But when we spoke about it, I didn't feel like, and this also come from my understanding of jiu-jitsu, I didn't feel like she was ready to go down that path. And for me, it is something that I would like her to do, but I want her to do it when she's able to do it, because it is, when we talk about that, like the jiu-jitsu thing, it is very confronting for the first time. And for a 4.5, 5-year-old girl who, is not that way inclined. And it doesn't matter whether it's a girl or a boy, but if they're not physical kids, and yes, like we play and things like that together, like with my daughter, but it's different. There's a different level of physicality that the kids, and I'm sure most of you with kids, especially young kids, if you've got more than one, will understand what I'm saying here. There's a difference in, and I don't even know if it's from boy to girl. I know for our family it is a difference from boy to girl, like the physicality that Ollie craves is completely different to the physicality that Soph does. And when she asked me if she could do jiu-jitsu, I don't think she was ready to do it. And my concern was if we put her in there and she wasn't ready to do it because of how confronting it can be to begin with, it may turn her off doing it later in life when she is going to potentially get more out of it. So, there's been 2 instances where we've explored different things, different physical things to put our kids in, where I've just gone, where we've either put them in and just seen what's going on and it's just like, yeah, not ready. Like, no point in trying to push this because it's not going to happen. Or it's like from a character perspective, from a personality perspective, maybe they're not ready to do it. Now, that doesn't mean, as I said, one of the 3 things that I really want all our kids to do is to do some form of self-defense. Of course, my hope is that that's jiu-jitsu, but it may not be. They may want to do something else. But, that's, the big thing from me that I'm trying to instill with our kids to try and give them the best. And, they may get to an age where they don't want to play sport. That's perfectly fine. I'm not trying to live physically vicariously through my kids. I just want them to have the best physical leg up that they can. And I guess for me, judging by and this is where we've kind of set out those rules. I have those 3 things that I want them to do because I think from a physical preparedness point of view, if we get them doing those things from a young enough age, it's going to kind of set them up later on in life. And those 3 things: gymnastics, swimming, and some form of self-defense. The self-defense thing is generally probably going to wait till they're a little bit older. But gymnastics and swimming, we've obviously tried to put them in that as soon as we can because I think there's a whole lot of physical benefit from that. So they're the 3 things. But the underlying tone with that is once they get older and they want to experience more things, to help them physically, I want to give them exposure to as much stuff as we possibly can, as many different sports as we can, but not force them to do anything. I want them to do what they enjoy doing. And that's that. That's the thing that they're the things, they're the underlying themes through what I believe are going to be the best way to give my children the best physical leg up to help them become physically capable human beings. We're not talking about super athletes or being professional athletes. I believe that's a whole other conversation where we can talk about physical potential, genetics, all those other things. But for now, the point of today's podcast, and I know I've rambled a bit because that's just what I do. Hopefully I've kind of threw some good information in there around it, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts. I want to know what you think. If there's, I guess, certain non-negotiables that you're going to have from a physical point of view that you want your kids to do. And just because I want them to go do those 3 things may not work out like that. But I think from the research I've done, the things that I've experienced and that I have seen from not only my own kids starting to develop now, but through watching and also coaching other children, I think that those philosophies, those foundations are going to be the best way to set kids up for physical success. And obviously there's mental things in there that you can add into that, but this is I'm more addressing the physical point of view today. So little bit of a different type of podcast, different format, different topic, but that's my thoughts on the topic, the issue, whatever you would like to call it. If you've got anything that you'd like me to cover off, please send me an email, drop me a DM on Facebook or Instagram, and we'll see you next week. Thanks. Bye.